Welcome to All Things Green. I'm Shelby, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. Dan Brown is one of the founders of Rust Belt Riders and an Echoing Green Climate Fellow. Dan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Can we start by just learning a little bit about you, whatever you feel like sharing with me?
Yeah, I like to say that I'm a left-handed dyslexic middle child. So
perfect.
I'm
I just learned a lot.
perfectly weird and see the world in my own sort of unique and bizarre way.
I love that. Are you from Cleveland originally?
I am. I grew up in South Euclid on the east side of Cleveland. I went away to DePaul University for college, and Cleveland called me right back after finishing up school there.
As it does.
Sure does.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about Rust Belt Riders. That's the primary gig I think we're here to talk about, although I'd like to hear more about that fellowship as well. Tell me what Rust Belt Riders is, what inspired the founding.
Yeah, so Rust Belt Riders is a worker-owned social enterprise that helps businesses, communities, and individuals divert food resource from going to landfills. Project Drawdown is like one of those fantastic resources that looks at all of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. And among the top is keeping food out of landfills. So when food goes to landfills, it emits methane. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas that accelerates climate change. And so by keeping food out of landfills, we not only avoid those harmful methane emissions, but we also have the opportunity to create carbon-sucking compost that can be applied on agricultural lands.
That sounds great. And I mean, I know it is great. I'm a participant.
Awesome.
Really excited about it. It was one of the things I was most excited about when I bought my own house, was to be able to compost again more easily.
Awesome.
You said that Rust Belt Riders is worker owned. So does that mean that Rust Belt Riders is a for-profit business?
Yes. So we are a decidedly for-profit social enterprise. So we believe that we can maximize our good by being in business, right? So I think that unfortunately, lots of nonprofits that exist in this space are often competing for similar grant funding.
Yeah.
By having a revenue model, we're less reliant on the whims of philanthropy or government incentives, and instead have made ourselves resilient to sort of the ebbs and flows of the economic conditions. And so I think like a really interesting example of our being able to weather that was sort of COVID, right?
Yeah.
We primarily started by offering our services to businesses, and then one day all businesses were closed. And had we not begun making soil and dipping our toes into the water of offering our services to residents, we would have been out of business. And I think that being a business comes with its own unique sets of challenges. I think that lots of businesses as they are run today can be devoid of morals and values. And I think that we're trying to inject this idea of like how you do your work is just as important as the work that it is you're doing. And so I think we're really just trying to like disrupt and sort of shake up what it means to be a business. Because we don't sit comfortably either in the like venture capital space of for-profit world startup stuff, nor do we sit comfortably in the world of like meager nonprofit life either.
Yeah, absolutely. As someone in that meager nonprofit life,
Yeah,
I totally
yeah.
see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Both have their roles to play.
They absolutely do.
I'm curious about, you talk about social enterprise. There are some organizations that have certifications. Like,
Yeah.
is there anything that you guys either have or are working towards? Or you just feel pretty good about that as like this is what we know we are, without any labeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think that by most measures, I think we check all of the boxes that like we could be a B Corp, though Ohio does not recognize B Corps legally.
Good to know.
As a like formal entity structure, you can still get certified, and I would encourage any business to do that. But I think that like at the end of the day, we weren't hearing from our clients or our community that like us being a B Corp was necessarily like super important. We have maybe spent a borderline unreasonable amount of time thinking about how we want to operate, but I think it's been through that grappling with what kind of business do we want to operate that has really led and informed a lot of the things that we've done. And so 2 years ago, we went from a 2-member LLC to a worker-owned enterprise. That was a like 3-year process of meeting with all of our staff members to understand the ins and outs of what ownership wanted to look like for them, what participation in the organization could look like. And so we got to work with this amazing attorney out of Colorado, Jason Weiner, who specializes in co-op law. And really just, I think that we tried to embed our values into our operating system so that and that makes us attractive to a lot of different people and potential investors, and also makes us like a third rail to others. And so I think that, we wanted and to this day really try and emphasize that like we want to operate in a way that like we want the world to look like. And so to us, that means democratic participation, shared decision making, that there is more wisdom in the masses than in just individuals. And so when we get to do that, I think it's really special, and we get to learn from and with businesses in different sectors that can inspire us.
Awesome. When you say WorkerOwned, tell me what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, so everybody that works at Rust Belt Riders, and there are now like 35 of us,
Congratulations.
which is kind of insane. Everyone has an opportunity to become a worker owner. We have set forth a sort of benchmark or criteria for what you need to achieve in order to be up for consideration to worker ownership. Today we have 17 worker owners. And so you must have worked 3,000 hours with the company and bought into a share of a Class A share. What that materializes in is that you can then vote on board representation. So there is a board comprised of a supermajority of worker owners, and they really just dictate sort of like broader strategic level decisions. Do we want to take on debt? Do we want to buy land? Are we hiring the right people? Are we paying the right wages? But on a day-to-day basis, like everyone, whether a worker owner or not, shares in the decision making of like what kind of routes do we run? What kind of clients do we want to work with? What partnerships are most important? We have transparent bookkeeping. We really strive to not have hierarchy and to not have bosses. And we think that by doing that, everybody takes greater ownership of the work that they're doing because like they own it, right?
Yeah.
Or the goal can be that they own it. And so there's some upside to that, as well as risk, obviously, to owning anything. The upside is in years of profit, worker owners will stand to receive patronage dividends. So in the same way that if you're a shareholder or a stockholder of a publicly traded company and it's profitable, its shareholders get paid out. Similarly, if you're a worker owner at Rust Belt and we have gobs of profits, there will be profit sharing for you, right? So in addition to like having your voice heard and reflected in the day-to-day decision making, you should stand to gain economically as well from your ownership in the company. And so we think that kind of organizational structure can lead to the opportunities for like generational wealth creation within jobs and within an economy where access to ownership is often the barrier between generational wealth and wage labor. And we believe that like ownership is critical to being able to overcome some of the systemic economic challenges that poverty entrenches into our society.
Absolutely. Remind me, when was Rust Belt Riders founded?
Yeah, so way back when, in 2014, myself and Michael Robinson bought a mountain bike, and we had a trailer welded to the back of it, and we looked like a Portlandia sketch, picking up food scraps from Beet Jar just down the road, and Spice Kitchen and Bar, rest in peace. Yeah, so we really just started with like $2,000 and a weird idea that like food scraps could go to our community garden on East 40th because our soil was terrible. And so, yeah, so since then we've grown to, like I said, 35 or so people on our team. We're working with hundreds of restaurants and businesses and thousands of individuals across Northeast Ohio, really focusing on Cuyahoga County. Last year, I think we diverted around like 8.5 million pounds of food scraps from going to landfills. And this year, we have just begun crunching the numbers, but we suspect it's going to be probably closer to 10 million. So,
wow. I'm looking forward to seeing those results. You told us a little bit about what early adoption looked like, you and a partner and a bike and a couple of places. But after that, how did adoption sort of grow from just that to where you are now?
Yeah, I think it really speaks to sort of the level of investment that small business owners in Cleveland have in the community, right? We aren't a service that, like, on its face saves you money. This is a very optional thing, right? Nobody has to be doing this. There are cities and communities where it's mandatory, but we feel like by having a coalition of the willing, participating in sort of championing this and finding within themselves the reasons or attributes about our service that are resonant to them, that like really helped us get our early wins. I think that Michael and myself and a number of our early team members emerged from the hospitality industry. I was working at a restaurant, as was Michael. Michael was bartending. And we just saw this disconnect between, there's like all this hype around like the farm to table movement of people and consumers really wanting to know where their food was coming from, and at the same time businesses wanting to display their altruism of, cage-free eggs and,
Sure.
we know our farmers. But that story was was disrupted and disconnected from the cyclical nature of like our food system and the potential of its cyclical nature. And so we really wanted to like close that loop. So if there was a farm to table movement, in our mind, it was only logical that there was a table to farm movement.
Yeah.
And nobody was doing it. And so I think like it was flashy at first because we like were weirdos on bikes. And so it was hard to not acknowledge like what it is that we were doing. And the more we talked about it, right, the relationship between climate change and food waste, hunger and food waste, and just sort of the inherent brokenness of our food system, I think just helped to create conversations, and we became this sort of turnkey approach for businesses to achieve a lot of good and give back to the community in a really simple, elegant way without a ton of pain, right? We tried to make it clean, simple, timely for people to do this. You didn't have to know how to compost. You just had to have the willingness to compost, or at least put your food scraps in a different bin.
Got it.
And so, yeah, so really, I think it's really on the backs of the hospitality industry of Cleveland that we're here today. It's because of their leadership that we got breweries and grocery stores and now whole communities that are understanding the intersection of food waste diversion, climate change, and climate resilience.
Awesome. So now we know a little bit more about how the business runs. We know a little bit more about why you've made some of these choices and what adoption has looked like. One of the big projects that I think has gotten a lot of press for you, you can tell me whether this is true or not, is your partnership at Westside Market. So first, for anyone who's not from Cleveland, what's Westside Market? And then after that, if you could tell us a little about what you're doing with them.
Yeah, so the Westside Market is arguably the most important food establishment in all of Ohio, I would argue. I think it's 111 years old as of this week. And
Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday. And yeah, I mean, I think to many people in Cleveland and in Ohio more broadly, like the Westside Market is a callback to a food system of yesteryears that like really doesn't exist anymore. And so when the new administration took helm of city government, there was an RFP that was issued that was inviting for requests for proposals from businesses in the community to say, hey, we want to put together a comprehensive plan that will ensure that food waste is diverted from going to landfills. Oh, and by the way, we own this historic market. So can you do a waste audit there and figure out what food waste diversion at the Westside Market could look like? So we responded to that RFP, and we're lucky enough to be selected as the contractor for that. That was a roughly 12-month contract where we got to work hand in hand with vendors that have been to the Westside Market for longer than I've been alive, and really got to learn a lot about what they were doing at the market to reduce food waste from happening in the first place, and then inject this kind of new idea, a new practice to the market. And so it required a lot of coordination. We got to develop new partnerships and strengthen existing partnerships. So we worked with the Hunger Network of Greater Cleveland to do some food rescue, which for those that aren't aware is the act of capturing food that is still fit for human consumption and redirecting it to people who are in need. And for anything that wasn't fit for human consumption, that would go into our system to be composted. We had weekly office hours with market vendors, and that was super successful, so much so that like the city renewed the contract with us after our pilot ended. And so we're looking forward to working with the new nonprofit ownerships or operators at the market to see that that's part of ongoing operations. But the second part of this, I think, is actually the more exciting. Not to say that the work at the Westside Market wasn't cool, but the roadmap that we got to develop, I think, is going to prove to be, I think, very catalytic in how the city and the county can approach solid waste management in a different way, leaning in towards circularity, leaning into nature-based solutions as a way for us to achieve our climate goals. And so that roadmap really sought to lay out a plan that would allow every Cleveland resident reasonable access to diverting food scraps from landfills. We have a recycling challenge. We have a landfill challenge in the city, but there isn't much pressure you can put on a global commodities market in the realm of aluminum or glass or cardboard, right?
Sure.
It's like pushing on a string. But what you can do is incentivize and remove barriers from residents for food waste, because everyone encounters food waste. Food waste is a thing that kind of has to and is best managed at a local level. And so what our roadmap laid out was a way to deploy and expand our current drop-off infrastructure to ensure that upwards of 90% of all Cleveland residents will have access to a drop-off location within a 15-minute walk of their home. In addition, we recognize that geography isn't the only barrier, so too are economics. And so our drop-off and pickup program have a recurring monthly cost. But Cleveland is one of the poorest big cities in the United States. And so we didn't want this to be a service limited to people of means. And so we, working with the city of Cleveland, responded to a USDA grant and EPA grant that seeks to bring catalytic funds to accelerate food waste diversion. And so through that application, we're trying to bring this roadmap to life. And if it comes to fruition, the city will house a scholarship fund that would allow SNAP-eligible families to participate in our drop-off program at no cost. And the idea there would be that we can start to actually measure and make meaningful change on overall diversion of food waste from landfills. So I mentioned earlier that last year we diverted like 8.5 million pounds of food scraps from landfills, and that was largely from Cuyahoga County. We estimate that that's like less than 1% of all food waste in Cuyahoga County. So as much work as we are doing, we are barely scraping the surface, and we need government to play a more active role in what is essentially an infrastructural level challenge and a sort of utility level challenge of treating food like the resource that it is, on par with like waste water treatment and electricity and internet. If you fundamentally believe that we need to rise to the occasion to avoid the worst impacts of climate crisis, food can no longer be sent to landfills, and there's a lot of spin-off investment that needs to take place to ensure that that can happen.
Yeah. Well, just as an aside, my drop-off is way closer than a 15-minute walk,
great.
just for me, which has been wonderful. I know because one time I had cookies in the oven that I needed 12 minutes, and then I realized I needed to take my compost, and I was back before those cookies were done, which was
great.
Really great. You're talking a lot about government, which
Yeah.
makes me think, I moved here from Austin, Texas,
Okay,
which had Compost Peddlers, a
Yes.
similar model. I think it started just a couple years before Rust Belt started here, and it was very successful until in 2018, the city actually adopted compost for all residents, which Compost Peddlers at the time said was bittersweet. You know, it means their model is kind of out of business, but also they really played that as our advocacy has made this happen. And so I'm curious your perspective on maybe a long-term vision for what it could look like for Cleveland or Cuyahoga County as municipalities to expand access. Maybe that's expanding on that roadmap you talked about. And then also I'm curious other ways that municipalities and government can support the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that like we've always had this sort of self-deprecating streak in us, which is that like I don't want there to be a need for Rust Belt riders, right? Like food waste is such a prolific and ubiquitous challenge that like it requires a Rust Belt riders, right? If there wasn't food waste in the world would be far healthier, far better, less polluting. And so like I look forward to the day where a Rust Belt riders doesn't need to exist. The reality of the matter is that like there is a lot of food waste and something needs to be done with it. And so, I mean, I think that like what has happened in Austin and what is happening in like New York right now, where sort of community composters are by no fault of their own and perhaps as a result of their own advocacy and work are sort of being put out of business or, their livelihoods are being challenged by municipalities stepping into the role that they were previously playing. I think that, if we look at the state of recycling in Cleveland and in Cuyahoga County, if we look at the state of landfilling in Ohio and Cuyahoga County, I think that this work is best kept in the hands of businesses that have been doing it for a while. And so, as much as we need the city of Cleveland and Cuyahoga County and inner ring suburbs to understand this issue, we have often been the ones that are sort of like pressing the issue to say, this is important. This is something you have control over, and we have credentialed ourselves out to wazoo to be leading experts on all things food waste processing infrastructure, composting, you name it. We think that by doing it the way that we're doing it, there's upside for economic development in the ways and the types of jobs that we're creating, and so. A really great analogous organization is in San Francisco. There's an organization called Recology. Recology has a 99-year contract with the city of San Francisco, an enviable contract, by the way. But they're an entirely worker-owned, employee-owned resource management organization, and it's through the city of San Francisco's ongoing collaboration with them that they have a stated goal of to be a zero waste city, I think by 2050, and they're like making meaningful headway into that. And so I think that there's some things that government is good at, there are some things that government is not good at, and just in the same way that the city came to the conclusion that like, hey, we're a government. Maybe we shouldn't be operating a public market. I would make the same argument that maybe the city of Cleveland shouldn't be interested in operating a composting facility. I think that that is something that we are more than capable of doing. And so that's all to say that I think that we are trying to align our business practices with the climate reality of food waste. And in doing so, we believe that governments can play a helpful and supporting role in working with us and contracting with us to encourage more of their businesses and residents to have easy access to food waste diversion. I think that it would make a lot of sense to me to adopt a pay-as-you-throw kind of disposal model that would encourage investment in infrastructure that sought more landfill diversion. And so, I think there's plenty of work still to be done, but there's also lots of conversations that still need to take place.
Awesome. What's new with Rust Belt Riders? Like, what are any new developments that you want to share with us, or other elements of the business that maybe we haven't talked about?
Yeah, so I think that I hope people are familiar or growing in familiarity with Rust Belt Riders. And so Rust Belt Riders provides these landfill diversion services. The arm of our organization that people might not be as familiar with is our product arm. So the services of Rust Belt Riders produce the products that we sell as Tilth Soil. And so Tilth Soil is a line of all certified organic soil blends for like seed starting, raised bed fill mixes, composts, you name it, that we sell across Ohio and the country. The goal there is that we believe that the sort of linkage of urban resource in the form of food scraps can actually be the fuel that helps to stabilize and support local food systems. And so by linking this like value-added product that is really high in nutrients, can sequester lots of carbon, we have the ability to have some really interesting conversations with stakeholders that are not in Cuyahoga County, but whose work and whose labor feeds Cuyahoga County. And it's that kind of circularity that I think is really fascinating, particularly because we need more rural communities to get on board with the reality of the climate crisis.
Yeah.
And often a really easy way to do that is through nature-based solutions. So smart farming, modern agricultural practices that use low or no-till practices have a tremendous opportunity to sequester a ton of carbon if soil science is sort of applied rigorously. And so, years ago, not too long ago, like we saw these algal blooms pop up on the western basin of Lake Erie. And that's almost a direct result of artificial phosphorus application. Artificial phosphorus application, by the way, that would not be needed if we had higher organic matter content in our soils. And so we really think that Tilth Soil can be a playbook and a tool for other community composters across the country to create a value-added product from the labor and services that they're providing back to their community. And so we're really trying to work with other community composters across Ohio in particular, but also across the country to see if Tilth can be the sort of unifying product line that allows us to reach scale and expand our services, because if we can do that, we then create this sort of like inflow of demand, because I can envision a world in which there is such demand for this awesome soil that we need more food waste into our system, right? And in doing so, we can lower the cost of services with the ultimate goal of getting like cost parity with recycling or landfilling. If you do that, then there's no real reason not to be composting. And so that's sort of like an ideal future state in my mind, and is stuff we're working towards.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, at the beginning when I introduced you, I said you were an Echoing Green Climate Fellow. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Echoing Green is like I think it's like 35 years old or so, maybe older. Sorry, Cheryl, if I got that wrong. It's like it's a amazing community of social entrepreneurs working on like big, hairy, challenging problems all over the world. And so my business partner Michael and I, we threw our hats in the ring to, for this really prestigious fellowship, and not really knowing if we would have any chance. And so, so we were named like Echoing Green Climate Fellows. This was probably 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. Time is elusive to me as a result of COVID. And so we get to be in community with folks in India and in Mumbai and like all over the world, working on like really entrenched challenges related to any number of issues, from like criminal justice reform to climate work. And so we've got to meet some of the like coolest people across the world working on really, really difficult challenges. And so it's through that network that we've been able to leverage partnerships to sort of kick open doors that have allowed us to continue to grow and expand our reach.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what's next for Rust Belt Riders as you guys continue to grow and expand and reach more and more people in Northeast Ohio. It's been so wonderful to talk to you, learn more about the business and sort of where you're coming from. Do you have anything that you want to plug so people can find Rust Belt Riders or you later on?
Yeah, I'd love that. Okay. You can find more about Rust Belt Riders by visiting rustbeltriders.com. And if you need soil, visit tilthsoil.com. And if you happen to know by some miracle the kind of soil that you need for next year, we're doing a pre-sale that gets you 10% off all of our soils.
All right. And if you'd like to stay connected to our show, be sure to follow us on TikTok at ATG Show. And if you'd like to rewatch full episodes, including this one, check out our YouTube channel, All Things Green Show. You can find all of our sources from today's episode, including the links that Dan just mentioned, in our show notes. All Things Green will be back at the same time next week. Thank you, and thank you, Dan, for being a part of the global sustainability movement.
Thanks.